Hello and welcome to another lesson. Today we're going to be talking about the federal and state court system. Before we get into that though, we need to go over a few definitions first. So the first one is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the official power to make legal decisions and judgments. Next up is original jurisdiction. So the ability of a court to hear a case first, hence original. Next one is appellate jurisdiction. Appellate jurisdiction is basically the right of a court to hear an appeal from a case that started in a court with original jurisdiction. Next up is limited. Limited jurisdiction is the authority to hear specific types of cases, such as a family court, traffic court, or even military courts, so like with soldiers. Next up is general jurisdiction. So courts that do not have limits on the type of cases they can hear. So you'll find general jurisdiction courts are also courts that have original jurisdiction, and limited jurisdiction courts are typically appellate jurisdiction courts. We're going to focus mostly on these two later on. Two kinds of crimes. Misdemeanor are typically minor crimes such as like jaywalking, speeding, or stealing like money or something. Felonies are more major crimes and they typically involve violence. So something like, say, armed robbery, felonious assault, that kind of thing, murder, major crimes. All right. On to the federal court system. So, the federal court system, as I said, we're going to first focus on original jurisdiction and appellate jurisdiction. So, original jurisdiction, remember, is, as I said, the court's right to hear the case first. Appellate jurisdiction is the court's right to hear the case second, or to hear a specific appeal. So when you look at this map over here, or this picture, you'll see U.S. District Courts, U.S. Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court of the United States. So, first off, U.S. District Courts are also a trial court. And they typically will have original. Doesn't like that eye, apparently. Jurisdiction. Next up is the appeals court. And like their name applies, they have appellate jurisdiction, which means they can hear any appeals from a trial court, like the district court. Now, the interesting thing about this is the federal court system is their trial courts are called district courts. Their appeals courts are actually called circuit courts. So if you ever hear anyone talk about a circuit court, they're actually talking about the federal appeals court. Okay, and if you ever hear them talk about a U.S. district court, they're actually talking about a trial court for the federal system. Now, that brings us to the interesting part with the U.S. Supreme Court. So if I were to ask you what kind of jurisdiction they had, you probably would say appellate jurisdiction because, well, they're the top, so the only court cases that are going to get to them are appeals from the appeals court, right? Well, they actually have both. So they have appellate and original. So the reason they have both is because your original assumption that they have appellate because they hear appeals from the appeals court is correct. So they have appellate jurisdiction. But they also have original jurisdiction for specific cases. those specific cases usually deal with cases that involve other countries. So, for example, there's a famous case that involved an American Jewish woman and Austria. So basically, Austria was in possession of a painting that belonged to this woman's family back when they lived in Germany. Her family left Germany and went to the United States, but not before the Nazis before World War II confiscated and stole all of her family's art. And that art found its way to Austria, into an art museum. Now, this lady sued Austria in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the only one that has the ability to hear those types of cases involving other countries. So that's where their original jurisdiction comes from, mostly. Okay? On to the state courts. So this is the Ohio judicial structure, as you can see the title here. But we're going to use it to talk about state courts. Largely, they're very similar to the federal system over here. So where you see like appellate, and original. Except the state Supreme Courts do not have original jurisdiction. They only have appellate. So, Court of Appeals, per its name, appellate. And then that means that the Court of Common Pleas, which are all these different kinds of courts, including ones with like limited jurisdiction like probate, traffic, relations, and all that kind of stuff, they have original. So these are going to be your trial courts. These are your appeals courts per their name. And then this is the top state appeals court, basically the state Supreme Court. So similar to this federal system, but a little different when you get to the top. All right? Now, let's talk about a few different kinds of cases and where they might go. So let's start out with an easy one. If you're caught speeding, going 75 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour area, which court will you most likely go to? And why will you be going to this court and not another? So the court system that you're probably going to be going to is a state court system. And specifically, you're probably going to a traffic court because you committed a traffic violation, right? And to give you an idea where that traffic court's going to be, it's going to be somewhere down here, most likely. Okay, so it's going to be one of these courts in the very bottom of the state court system. All right, number 2. If you were found guilty in a U.S. District Court of tax evasion, which court would you most likely go to next and why? So a U.S. District Court is the key term here, all right? If you're in a U.S. District Court over here, the next place you're likely going to be going to is a U.S. Appeals Court or a circuit court, okay? You will likely not go to a court of appeals in a state system, okay? You're most likely going to a circuit court or a U.S. Court of Appeals, or perhaps even the Supreme Court. But your most likely next stop is a U.S. Court of Appeals or a circuit court. Why is this not cooperating? All right, it just does not like eyes. Anyways, now, last one. let's say that you are suing the country of Japan in order to get your super rare vinyl disc collection that they apparently stole. Which court are you suing in and why? If you remember from my little story about the U.S. Supreme Court, you would say U.S. Supreme Court. And that's because they're the only court that has the authority or jurisdiction, and that is the original jurisdiction as well, to hear that kind of case involving another country, such as Japan. All right? Well, that's a very basic overview of the federal and state court system. And if you have any other questions, just feel free to ask.